Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the IPC Forum on Energy Innovation. My name is Liz Reynolds, and I'm Executive Director of the IPC. For those of you who are not familiar with the IPC, it's an interdisciplinary research center that is focused on innovation, productivity, and competitiveness. The IPC draws faculty, students, and researchers from across the Institute, from engineering, the social sciences, management, to focus on issues related to industrial growth and transformation, and analyze the implications for firms, workers, society, and the global economy. Few projects really epitomize the work of the IPC than the one we're here to discuss today. The Energy Innovation Project, which was started just over 3 years ago, and which Richard will discuss in more detail, analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of the U.S. energy technology innovation systems and all its complexity: government incentives, regulation, markets, and public and private institutions. Today we have a superb panel of speakers and experts to discuss these issues, as well as very knowledgeable members of the audience. And I am going to briefly introduce the panel before I hand the podium over to Richard Lester. So, first, our speakers, the authors. Richard Lester is the Japan Steel Industry Professor and Head of the Department of Nuclear Science and Engineering. He is also the founding director of the IPC and the faculty co-director. David Hart is Professor in the School of Public Policy and Director of the Center for Science and Technology at George Mason University. He is currently on leave serving as Assistant Director for Innovation Policy at the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy. Our panelists, who will have to identify themselves once they get up here. Dan Goldman is the CFO of Great Point Energy, as well as President of Great Point Energy International. Dan has been involved in over $4 billion worth of energy-related finance transactions and has deep knowledge of the clean energy industry in the US and in China. Neil Rasmussen is Senior Vice President of Innovation for Schnieder Electric. He is an expert on next-generation high-efficiency data centers and holds 25 patents related to the field, as well as over 50 publications. And finally, Peter Rothstein is President of the New England Clean Energy Council, the region's leading force in developing the clean energy industry. Peter has worked extensively on national and regional policy, as well as in a variety of capacities in the clean tech venture space. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to now hand the podium over to Richard Lester.
David, do you want to?
Okay. So I'm David Hart, and I just have to perform a legal function first, which is to say that anything I say here, I'm saying in my capacity as a professor, not as a White House spokesman. And in fact, all the work was completed before I started my current position. And I'm not currently deeply involved in any of the issues that we wrote about, for better or worse. I'll let you decide on that later. I also wanted to just say thank you to Richard for sparking my interest, really reigniting my interest in energy innovation, which I had worked on in the past. And I think our work together, our interactions occasionally, creative tension emerged, has really stretched my thinking, and I hope some of that is reflected in the book. And then last, I just wanted to comment briefly on the remarkable process by which this book went from manuscript to publication in light speed. So I don't know if anybody from MIT Press is here, but it reminded me of the cartoon strip BC. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it's about cavemen. And there's one where a caveman sees a clam walking around, and he yells, "Clams have legs, clams have legs." And the clam then has a little thought bubble, and it says, "Now I have to kill him." And I think MIT Press is kind of like that. Now we know that they can do that. I wouldn't blame any future authors, and certainly I'm going to try to push for that rapid response that we got from them in the past. So I wanted to thank them. And I'll turn it over to Richard.
Thanks, David. Well, first of all, thank you for coming, especially on this horrendous day. But what we want to do is to report to you on the results of this project, this 3-year project that was sponsored by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and based at the IPC. And a large number of people were involved in this, faculty and staff and students, and some of them are here. And I think that there will be, and I hope there will be, many more opportunities for me to say thank you to those who are here. as well as those who aren't here, for their terrific contributions to this project. The book that resulted from the project is really intended, I think, to start or at least expand an ongoing debate rather than to close it off. And we're very fortunate, and Liz mentioned this, to have three leaders of the regional energy community here in the New England region who will, as in their comments, I think, pick the ball up and move it forward. And one obvious reason to promote the debate at the regional level is, and David will, I think, forgive me for saying this, the dysfunction on these issues in Washington. But there is also a positive reason, and that is that there are many opportunities to promote innovation at the regional level. And in fact, that's really been an important subject of research at the IPC for more than a decade. But basically, the book tells the following story. It says that we face a very big innovation challenge in the energy field over the next few decades, bigger than most people realize, including many people who were active in the field. And it says that the US energy innovation system today isn't close to being up to the task of delivering hundreds of billions of dollars of mostly private investment into cost-competitive, scalable, and environmentally benign new technologies, making thousands of new sites available for the construction of often controversial energy facilities and infrastructure, and every year training tens of thousands of young people at every level, from craft workers to PhD scientists. And the book says that we're not close to being ready to do this. But it also says that the energy innovation challenge is actually within reach, provided that we're willing to be as creative and rigorous in our thinking about how to redesign the institutions for innovation as we are about the innovations themselves. And by institutions of innovation, I'm talking about the entire complex of direct support from government, indirect incentives, regulations, public and private research and educational institutions, codes, standards, and markets within which new technologies are developed and taken up by energy suppliers and users. The book talks about the implications of getting this right and of getting it wrong. It doesn't claim that the transition to a low-carbon energy system will also be the solution to our current economic problems. It doesn't claim, for example, that the energy transition will play the same transformational role in the economy as the digital revolution has done and continues to do. Big as it is, the energy sector only accounts for about 7 or 8% of the nation's economic output today. And although we can anticipate an increase, maybe a significant increase, in value-added energy services associated in no small part with those same digital technologies, the total value added associated with the energy sector isn't likely to rise much above where it is today. It also says that the energy transition is going to create winners and losers, economically speaking, and that compensation of the losers is going to be a big part of the overall cost of the transition. But it does also make the claim, or I should say it does make the claim, and this may come as a little bit of a surprise to those who've been expressing alarm about the erosion of America's innovative prowess, that US leadership in energy innovation will be essential to the success of the world's efforts to both mitigate carbon emissions and adapt to their consequences. Or in David's current boss's phrase, John Holdren's phrase, avoiding the unmanageable and managing the unavoidable. That the US leadership in this will be essential to our success in doing these things. The starting point of our project was a kind of scenario building exercise related to energy innovation, in which we said, suppose we take the findings of the climate science community seriously. Now, in Washington at the moment, that's seen as quite a radical idea, even maybe a subversive idea. We have a remarkable number of elected officials who are prepared to deny categorically that there is even a problem. And the subject has become almost the great unmentionable. It's not something that you're supposed to talk about. But of course, there isn't really anything radical about taking the scientific consensus on an issue seriously. On most other issues, we do it all the time. And so we asked in this project, what if we really do need to achieve the goals for carbon emission reduction that the climate community has proposed and that the president articulated earlier in his administration? What would it mean for the energy sector? And more specifically, what kind of energy innovation effort would be required? The problem, of course, is that most low-carbon energy supply technologies are too expensive or too difficult to scale or have other environmental or economic drawbacks. And so, short of imposing a mandate, there are really only two ways that we can make this transition to a low-carbon energy system. We can either make the high-carbon technologies and fuels more expensive through some sort of tax scheme, or we can innovate so that the low-carbon energy technologies become more competitive. In other words, we can either increase the cost of the bad things, in this case high-carbon fuels, or we can reduce the costs of the good things. In the last several years, the energy debate, the energy and climate debate, has been dominated by the first idea. And so far, of course, very little progress has been made, at least at the federal level. In the end, I think certainly we would agree, and many others I think in this room would probably agree, that some kind of carbon price is going to be essential. But in this project, we focused on the second approach, making low-carbon energy technologies more competitive. Now, what often happens at this point is that the debate degenerates into a kind of a shouting match. We need to focus on efficiency. No, we need to, let's use more natural gas. No, we need more renewables. No, we need more nuclear. But the fact is that we likely to need more of everything. There'll be no silver bullet and no single innovation that will meet all needs and solve all problems. Instead, what we will need is a sustained flow of innovations over a period of decades, a sustained flow of innovations of different kinds over a period of decades. And so we asked, in this project, we asked a different question. Innovation doesn't emerge spontaneously out of thin air, even when, as is emphatically not the case here, the impetus for it is fully internalized within a set of market transactions. It takes place instead within a set of institutions, markets, regulations, firms, and so on. And the question we asked was, what sorts of arrangements would be most likely to yield this flow of innovation that we're going to need? What sort of institutional setup will we need? And what policies will need to be adopted in order to build it? The underlying assumption here is that there is such a thing as an energy innovation system, that it operates according to certain rules and principles, and like a technological system, it can actually be designed. Now, I've been talking almost exclusively here about climate change, but of course that's not the only thing. And in the last 3 years, in the 3 years during which we were doing this project, we had 4 enormous shocks to the energy system. We had, of course, the deepest economic recession in many decades. We had the worst oil spill, the worst offshore oil spill in history. We had this extraordinary spectacle of revolution sweeping across the Middle East and North Africa with profound, or at least profoundly uncertain implications for the supplies of oil and gas from that region. And of course, we had Fukushima. These events are, at least for a few months until the next one came along, focused on other objectives of energy policy, affordability of energy, job creation, energy security, ensuring public health and safety, and minimizing other kinds of environmental impacts. All of these are serious problems, but avoiding climate change is the biggest and most complicated problem of all, and that's the one that we focused on. We said, if you solve that one, at the very least, you're not going to make the others worse, and probably you'll make a number of them better. But the shocks of the last few years also taught us, or teach us, another lesson. That in energy, as our colleague Paul Joskow likes to say, in energy there are surprises. And perhaps this has been an unusually volatile 3 or 4 years. Certainly we might hope not to see a repetition of what we've had in the last 3 or 4 years. But all the same, there are likely to be many more surprises over the next few decades. And if we're serious about building an energy innovation system that works for climate change, we're going to need to recognize that for much of the time, the climate issue may not be the only or the most important game in town. We cannot assume a laser-like public focus on this issue during the next 40 to 50 years. We recognized early on, even before we started, that we weren't the first people to be in this energy innovation space. And here is what a number of people have said. We need more money for R&D. We need a new Manhattan project or an Apollo project. Let's just get the prices right. If we do that and then let the market work, we'll be fine. The government isn't working well. Let's fix it. Let's change how people behave. Let's change how people live. None of these perspectives is wrong. In fact, they're all arguably right, but they're all on their own notably incomplete. And none of them really have much to tell us about how the innovation process actually works. They have very little to say about that. So what we did was the following, and I'll just briefly talk about what we did, and then David will report on what we have concluded and recommended. What we did was to create a simple, very simple model of the energy innovation process, that it can be thought of as consisting of 4 distinct sets of activities: the discovery and the development of new possibilities, option creation, we call that; ascertaining and demonstrating the viability of these options in the marketplace, think of that as demonstration; making reductions in cost and other kinds of improvements during the initial adoption of the innovation in the marketplace, which we call early take-up or early adoption; and finally, the continued refinement of the innovation when it is in large-scale commercial use. We call that improvements in use. These 4 categories of things don't exactly map onto the more familiar taxonomy of basic research, applied research, development, and so on, for a number of reasons. One is that the creation of new options isn't synonymous with basic research. Basic research may lead to the creation of new options, but new options are created in many other places and in many other kinds of activities. And also because, and this I think is equally important to emphasize, a great deal of innovation happens after an innovation has entered the marketplace. And that if you think about the cumulative impacts of innovation over the life cycle of a technology, often they vastly exceed the impact on performance of the original, the innovation when it was originally introduced. The risks, the goals, the capital requirements, and much else differ in each of these four stages. And in particular, the capital requirements, roughly speaking, increase by an order of magnitude. We then asked, what do we know about this process? What can we say about what works and what doesn't work at each stage? And at this point, we looked for evidence in three different places. We looked for historical evidence from the energy innovation system itself, relying on case studies of past performance, both successful and less successful case studies. We relied on empirical evidence from other sectors, and here we asked a group at the National Bureau of Economic Research, led by Rebecca Henderson, our former colleague now at Harvard, and Richard Newell, to consider the lessons from pharmaceuticals and telecoms and agriculture and electronics and other sectors. And thirdly, we considered theories, mostly economic theories, about innovation and innovation policies. We used this evidence to construct a set of general criteria for the design of the energy innovation system. You can think of these as design principles. First, that it's necessary, if you want to accelerate innovation, to accelerate all four stages of that process. And if you only focus on one, for example, say that what we have to do is to spend more on R&D, the impact of that on the front end of the process will simply be dissipated unless effective strategies are also in place to accelerate the downstream stages. Secondly, that there must be space for new entrants. Thirdly, that competition is good and that it's helpful to have competition at every stage between technologies, between organizations, and between business models. That rigorous and timely down selection is important at each stage. And finally, that the scale must be large enough. That is, that the inputs of financial and human capital must be consistent with the scale of the task. All of these criteria, I think, are fairly obvious. I don't think any of them would come as a surprise either to practitioners or to researchers on innovation. But it's also fair to say that our current energy innovation system routinely fails to satisfy each one of them. And in the book, we discuss the weaknesses of current federal and state policies and business strategies with respect to these. I'm going to skip over that and then just conclude with a couple of points. We looked in detail, given these criteria, about what the energy innovation system will need to do. How big is the innovation task? And here, these are arithmetic statements. If we want 80% reduction in carbon emissions by the year 2050, as a number of people have advocated, if we also want a respectable but not extraordinary rate of economic growth, 2% per capita per year between now and mid-century, and if further we assume a population growth of a little under 1% per year, which is what the demographers predict with actually very little variance, that means that we must achieve roughly 7% per year reduction in carbon intensity, defined as carbon emissions per unit of economic output. What we have managed to achieve over the last quarter century is about 2% per year. The difference between 2% and 7% is a measure of the magnitude of the innovation task. That's what, in some sense, lies ahead. Of course, we have other choices. We could say, this looks too hard. Let's not have 2% economic growth per capita per year. Let's have 1% economic growth per capita per year. Not a popular position, I think, for most, certainly elected officials to take. Or we could say, let's have no population growth or less population growth. But aside from those things, we don't have any real, we don't have any room to maneuver. These are arithmetic statements, not things that politicians can debate and argue about. We can break the the thing down further and say carbon intensity can be divided into two components: energy intensity and intensity of energy use, and decarbonization of energy supplies. And the combination of those two things have to add up. If we say we need 7% per year reduction in carbon intensity, those two things have to add up. And they're to a large extent interchangeable. The more we do of one, the less we need of the other. But how much we need in both cases will be much greater, whichever combination we choose, will be much greater than what we have achieved in recent years or even decades. The gray bars are what we have achieved in terms of decarbonization. We're barely been above zero or below zero in terms of getting carbon out of our energy supply system. And on the energy intensity side, we've been close to 2% per year reduction in energy use per unit of economic output. Part of that, of course, has arisen as a result of moving energy-intensive activities out of the United States. And to the extent that those have moved to high carbon emitting countries, nothing has been achieved. In fact, it may have been exacerbated. But the basic point is that we have to do much better on both decarbonization and rate of change in or reduction in energy intensity. So we then thought that it was useful to picture what needs to be done in terms of three waves of innovation. And I think at this point, maybe I can hand over to David to tell us where we ended up in terms of recommendations.
Great. So I'm just going to indicate what our recommendations are and our thoughts about what might get us to where we need to be in 2050. And we laid it out in these three waves, the first wave being mostly focused on energy efficiency. These are things we already know how to do, and in fact, in many cases already are doing, just not enough. And there the barriers are not about technology, but about organizations and institutions. The second wave, where we do need some great technological progress, is on low carbon energy supply. And then finally, we think about what's over the horizon. And one of our presumptions in the book is that there's not going to be a breakthrough between now and 2050 that transforms our system. Energy is too complex, too important, too many stakeholders for something that's either in the lab now or hasn't been thought of to make a huge difference on that time scale. So that's one of the more controversial assertions that we make, but that's the premise. But nonetheless, we need to think about what might happen, where there are opportunities, where we can unleash the creative faculties that characterize our country and what we're so good at. So there's no reason to stop doing basic research, but we don't think that it's going to pay off on the scale that we need before 2050. I think I have this. So, so these are the same things arrayed just a little bit differently, mapping our four phases or activities of the innovation process against the waves. And so in the current decade, we think about focusing on energy innovation, energy efficiency, and there the tasks are primarily in the two later stages of the innovation process. For the second wave, the decarbonization of supply, we're focused on the two middle stages of the innovation process. And then what's over the horizon, we're thinking about option creation. Now, there's another fundamental insight, I think, that comes out of the analytical work that Richard presented, and that's the central role of electricity. And this is a feature of the system that crosses all three waves. Unless the electricity system works better, we're not going to get the innovation that we need. It's terrific for people to drive Chevy Volts, but you're actually driving a coal-powered vehicle at the moment, at least in most of the country. So unless we want that kind of a transportation system, we're going to need a better electrical power system. We don't think gas can get us there. We don't think that it's natural gas. We don't think biofuels can get us there. and efficiency alone can't get us there. So electricity is necessary and much more central to the innovation discussion than it has been so far. And in this area, and I'll just sketch a few of the broad themes here because we want to get to our panelists who've had taken the opportunity to come down and join us. Here we argue that the main thing that needs to be done is to complete the wave of restructuring that began in the 1990s, stalled out with the California crisis of 2000, and is more or less frozen now for the last 10 years. And what such a restructuring would do would be to open new spaces to competition, especially in power generation and also in providing energy services to end users. There's still a need for utilities to own the grid. We don't believe that there should be 2 or 3 wires to every house, but that this utility will have to operate differently than current utilities do, especially those in vertically integrated states where they own end-to-end power, control of the power system. So this is the 3rd chapter of the book, and we argue that this is relevant to all the 3 waves of innovation that we are looking for. Okay, so now the first wave, just again very briefly. The biggest opportunity for energy efficiency lies in buildings. Buildings use about 40% of all energy in the US, 70% of the electricity. And as some of you have probably heard Steve Selkowitz's talk from Lawrence Berkeley, he came and gave a talk while we were working on the book. He says, it's not just low-hanging fruit, it's fruit that's lying on the ground and rotting. And there are some really encouraging trends, especially in the green buildings sector. And there's a need to just push those trends further. And we argue that the real sword that can cut the Gordian knot of institutional and organizational barriers here is building energy codes for new buildings, appliance standards for appliances. So we're really talking about regulation driving innovation, and I think that will be one of the themes of our discussion in the coming roundtable. And then the more challenging piece is what to do about existing buildings, retrofitting existing buildings. And here we have an array of thoughts. Most of them focus on trying to get more private capital into that space. And there are many experiments underway that I think we need to encourage and push. The second wave, low carbon electricity supply. So here is probably where our most novel contributions come, I think. We envision a set of new institutions being created to carry out innovation in electricity supply. And there are several pieces to this. The first is, and I think somebody told us that the worst 3 words you can utter in Washington are federal innovation surcharge. So nonetheless, here it is, federally mandated innovation surcharge, a tax on electricity that would pay for this whole system and take it out of the year-to-year vagaries of the appropriations process. That this money then would be handed over to a set of what we're calling trustee organizations that would then be forced to invest in our new set of institutions, which we call regional innovation investment boards. And these are the actual investors in projects or programs in those 2 middle stages of the innovation process, in demonstration and early take-up. And they would be policed to some extent by what we're calling the gatekeeper. So this gatekeeper entity would have to certify that projects are going to actually achieve innovation goals before the boards can invest in them. So this is a system within our broader energy innovation system that would accelerate low-carbon electricity supply. So here's my attempt to graphically show it. On the left-hand side, you see the funds going into the system from the electricity surcharge. Then you have a set of trustees, and one of the things that distinguishes our thinking about this is that these trustees would have a choice of which regional board to put their money into. So there's going to be competition among the regions for these tax receipts. And the states here, these trustee organizations, are choosing on the basis of the portfolios of these regions. So they're not picking projects, they're picking a set of projects that these regional boards have identified. And then the projects themselves then can pitch their ideas to any of the boards. So there's competition at a number of levels here. And we hope a new idea, especially drawing on the regional variation in the country or the regional strengths of the country, that can get us a little bit out of the gridlock that we've had in recent years. And then finally, just a few words about Wave 3. I know it's near and dear to the hearts of people here at MIT, and one of the commentators on the book said, you know, you really shouldn't have quite so much MIT in your book. And I said, well, look at my co-author. So there's great stuff going on here. It should be continued. It should be put on a stable funding basis. Unfortunately, energy R&D funding has gone up and down a lot. So we argue there's a need to sustain this funding, to make sure that that the results of research are openly shared. We believe in collaboration and exchange, not only domestically but globally. And then the last chapter, we just try to take what we see as the greatest hits from the book and put them into a 10-point framework, only because 10 is a nice, neat number. And I'll just read them off here, and then we can move to the discussion. So I think the most important idea is that energy innovation will be driven by new entrants, whether they're startups, whether they're IT companies moving into energy management, whether they're spin-offs from existing large firms. What we need is a new blood, especially in the electric power sector. And of course, one of the motivating factors for these kinds of entrants and for their impact is competition. So we envision competition playing a bigger role in the system than it does today. We need a transformation of the utilities, what we call, and borrowing on the work of Peter Fox Penner, smart integrators, that the utilities function is not to own the whole system, but to integrate many, many pieces. So it's sort of a plug-and-play vision of the utility. That the energy efficiency marketplace also becomes stronger, also characterized by competition. And then I've gone through some of the new institutional ideas in the second wave, regional boards, energy trustees at the state level, the federal gatekeeper. I haven't talked yet about the smart grid. I've just passed over that, but we envision that as part of the second wave as well. And there's a need to change the pricing structure of our electricity markets to enable the smart grid to really achieve its potential. Open grid architecture and customer control, these are features of a smart integrator model, I think. And then finally, the last wave, a larger, more diverse federal energy research structure. So thinking about breakthroughs over the horizon. History doesn't end in 2050, but we're going to need new options. As Richard mentioned at the beginning, surprises happen. We don't know what surprises may lie between now and 2050, so we're going to need options to be available down the road that are different from those that we're going to draw on to make this first big leap against carbon emissions. And with that, I think I can conclude. Blank slide, so I know I've got to the end, and look forward to the discussion. Seating arrangement or no? Okay.
You want to do it at the end? Okay.
It's going to sit in the middle. I guess I'll sit in the middle.
Yeah, you will. So I think the way we had planned it, and it wasn't, I'd say, a highly planned activity, but each of the panelists will pick up on one aspect of what this story is about. And I think maybe, Neil, would you kick us off?
Sure. My particular focus and passion has to do with the Wave 1 efficiency problem. And particularly what I'd like to address my remarks to is the idea of regulations as a solution there. The book proposes that pretty early on. It sort of converges on that as a key part of the solution for efficiency, whether it's code, standards, regulations, or soft regulations like Energy Star, that's part of the answer. Yet every day we turn around and somebody is banging the table talking about job-killing regulations. We got to get rid of all these things. So I don't think it's practical to continue to talk about that without addressing what those concerns are and having some kind of response to it. And that's what I'd like to talk about here a little. There's really three arguments against regulation in this context. One is that regulations are inefficient, and if only we could get the free market to work, we'd solve all these problems. The second is that regulations are a burden, and all these poor companies are drowning under filling out forms and paperwork, and they just can't compete in the global markets because they're overwhelmed by the regulations. And the other one that's important here is that regulation is stifling innovation. It's constraining the system so we can't actually do new things. And my personal experience in the start of my career, I kind of looked at regulations as a necessary evil, but came to view them quite a bit differently, and particularly among those three issues, and I'd like to just briefly talk about them. The free market problem, if efficiency is so good for everybody and it's low-hanging fruit that's on the ground rotting, why don't the customers just pick it up? What do they need us for? And the fact that over the years, I worked in a company. We developed a team of 1,200 engineers, made thousands of products for consumer and also commercial use. And I directed that operation, and I tried to drive into it the idea of efficiency from an early stage, is that we were going to differentiate on that and make products that were more efficient demonstrably and sell on that. And I was very disappointed over the course of my 25-year career doing this, that it just did not work. Because of our size, we were able to do a lot of marketing studies and research. We were able to demonstrate the same product, selling it on a marketing campaign based on energy efficiency versus selling it on another feature, like its maintainability or serviceability or its flexibility. Efficiency always lost. It's amazing. People do not buy based on efficiency, and the book makes some of the points of why that happens. For one thing, the people who pay the electric bill or energy bill often are not the people making the decisions about the product. The people view their energy bills as an act of God, and it's decoupled from the actions they take. And they also, even if they see energy as an issue, it's lower, it's not number one, it's somewhere down a little bit, and the decisions are actually made on higher things in the list. So, unfortunately, it just doesn't work to sell based on energy efficiency, and the free market solutions, in my experience, just weren't working, and I was very disappointed about it. However, one of the things that's interesting is when regulations are imposed, suddenly it's easy for everybody to get together. So I had to fight people for many years arguing, why are we investing in making more efficient products? It doesn't work. You're wasting time, you're wasting our money, we got to go work on other things. And the good news is that eventually when regulations were imposed, like Energy Star comes out, all of a sudden there's complete unanimity on what to do. Oh, we just have to meet that. Stop making the products that don't meet it, and let's just meet it. Very simple, the discussion is 5 minutes long and it's all over. Very interesting, the dynamic of what goes on in this. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that as a technique to move organizations and the industries forward. The next issue is the burden. Is it a big burden on companies or to have these regulations? And if you think about it, in my experience, it was kind of shocking. It actually fixed a lot of our problems. We had a lot of problems where we would fight for years over our strategy. Should we invest in making more efficient products? Fight, fight, fight. As soon as Energy Star comes out or a regulation comes out, the fight is 5 minutes long. Oh, let's make a list of the products that don't meet it, get rid of them, and let's make sure the next products all meet it. Discussion is 5 minutes. This actually removed a tremendous amount of inefficiency from our organization, making our own decisions internally. It's kind of shocking, the pickup we get from that. Now, it can be a burden if you have conflicting regulations, like among countries. It's one thing we really have to fix is try and harmonize regulations among countries. It was a lot worse 20 or 30 years ago, but we need to do much better. Even in our own country, we have the DOE and EPA that are doing, they're not exactly regulations, but things that actually conflict with each other. And it's not clear, and it's still a bit of a mess there. So there's a lot we can do better there, and I could talk some more about them. And there's dumb regulations that ought to be fought. But on balance, I think in general, they aren't a burden. Remember, every company that has to put a regulation on things they have to meet, they have a lot of internal standards anyway. Just append it to the list. Our list of internal design requirements and other things we have to meet is always longer anyway. Appending it to the list is simple. It's already defined what the specification to meet is. Somebody wrote a big, thick document about it, so I don't have to write it. It actually removes burden. And the other one is, do regulations crush innovation? And one argument is you write a regulation around a technology, and then you can freeze out other technologies. And there's a lot of examples where, unfortunately, that has happened. It's not and we should be able to avoid it. Some regulations are well written and do avoid it. But it doesn't always happen. Like we can write a regulation that's saying, basically, the first paragraph of the regulation could be, you're not an air conditioner unless you have XYZ. Then I can't, if I don't have XYZ, I can't even apply to meet the regulation, because I'm not even defined as an air conditioner if I make some new technology nobody ever thought of before. And that's just on the list of kind of crazy things that happen that I think we can fix in that regard. One thing I would say over and over again, if you look at big companies, and our problem here is big companies, because little companies, we have big problems. Little companies aren't going to solve them, in my personal view. Big companies have to solve these problems. Big companies are really bad at orienting to opportunities. I know, I've been involved in little companies, big companies. They're very bad at orienting to opportunities, and they don't innovate well. Even when they make innovations or inventions in their company, they rarely bring them to market well. But they are incredible at innovating when threatened. Big companies, when you put a regulation on them, it's amazing how fast and how innovative and creative people get in a big hurry. I've witnessed it firsthand through my career. Some of the best things, some of the greatest innovations we've had were driven that way. So honestly, I think there's a lot to be said for innovation-driven regulation. I mean, regulation-driven innovation in that form. And you can see it show up. You can see what happened with, the CAFE standards in the 70s. You can see it. I saw a great example about a year ago. They put efficiency standards on dishwashers to pick up so they wouldn't have to use as much water or as high a temperature water. And there was a little conference created where the people making the detergent got together with the dishwasher makers, and they tried to figure out how to make this work. And the quotes were, these people had never met each other before. And you can and they were all talking about, hey, we're getting together and thinking this through as a system, and now we have, we're starting to come up with answers of how to do this. To me, I think that that's a very positive thing. So although regulations sound like more and more of a dirty word politically these days, I think there's a lot to be said for them. And even if you disagree with all of those arguments, we have a chance to lead the world in establishing regulations. All over the world, people are putting regulations in place, and for the most part, they wouldn't mind following us. From my experience talking to regulators around the world, if we don't lead by establishing regulations, codes, building codes, all these other, if we don't lead it, that doesn't mean the rest of the world isn't going to do it. They're going to do it. If we don't do it, it's like, to me, it's unilateral disarmament. We're going to be taken out by them because how are we going to compete in a world where they're setting all the regulations? So I think that's the final argument that's the most compelling to me of why this is a critical part of our solution, at least in this wave one.
Thank you very much. Dan?
Yep, great, very interesting. Before I talk a little bit about finance and also put that in the context of the international market, particularly China, I want to mention one thing. I completely agree with some of the thoughts around energy efficiency and the structure and financial solutions that are needed in the near term. And we have a company right here in Boston that has just done an amazing job in really 2 years, has grown, has added almost 200 staff, and has managed to figure out through the brains of the CEO how to address an energy efficiency market at the residential level. They go in, they audit houses, and they replace they wrap pipes, and they do a whole bunch of stuff, and they make it extremely efficient, and they do it in a business model that works. And it was just some slight changes in the structure of the market that allowed this company to develop this business model. So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's going to grow pretty rapidly over the next 10 years, as you point out. But I want to talk a little bit about finance and the challenge of commercialization, which relates quite clearly to sort of the second and third areas of the map. I think it's interesting to note that over the last 5 years, there's been about $16 billion of venture investment in clean energy. And that's a heck of a lot of money in a period which had a lot of volatility and a lot of financial trouble. That money was invested in about 800 plus companies, again, 5 years. And so there is a lot of innovation, and there is a lot of money being poured into clean energy technology companies. The interesting thing is, as that money's been going in, it's taken a very long time for it to come out. On average, for the companies that did do an IPO, it's about an 8-year from first venture investment to IPO, average of 8 years. Many that are longer and a few that are shorter. But this is a result, as was pointed out by Richard and David, of the capital intensity of the business, of the complexity of the energy markets, and quite frankly, of the slow adoption rates. And we see that most particularly on very capital intensive technologies, and that relates to the company I'm involved with, Great Point Energy, which is a gasification technology converting coal or other carbon feedstocks into natural gas and capturing the CO2 in the process. It's a technology that you have to do at large scale, at billion-dollar-plus plants. And as you try to go from demonstration lab to pilot to demonstration to full scale, and start looking around the capital markets to see where are you going to fill those gaps in your capital structure, it becomes quite evident that there is really no market for providing the capital to scale up these technologies, to take these innovations and bring them to market, particularly the ones that are capital intensive. So what you need to do is you look at your venture capital firms that have backed you, and they're investing in technologies, they're investing in management teams, they're putting 10, 20, maybe $100 million into these businesses. They will not fund the scale up of multi-$100 million projects. You look at the private equity and the capital markets. Private equity will not take the risk of commercializing new technology. They want tightly structured contracts. They want proven technologies. They want engineering, procurement, and construction contracts that are very secure and that are guaranteed. So the technology is demonstrated to work. So there's no options in terms of private equity, large private equity capital coming in to fund this scale up. So what we're left with is a huge gap in the market, which the government tried to fill through 1703 and 1705 loan programs, but largely unsuccessfully, and now with a huge amount of stigma as a result of some failures. It was inevitable that there were going to be failures. They were building a portfolio, so I don't think they expected that every project was going to be successful. But what we need to really figure out is how, if we're going to do 80% in 40 years, how do we accelerate the investment so that we have the funding structures to take the innovations that come out of the labs that are piloted and then can get them to market in a reasonable time period so investors can get a return and then the capital structures are there. And I think one of the most important things we should realize is that if we don't do it, others will. And China is doing it in spades. There are technologies being developed in China. There are technologies like ours that are being drawn over to China because the money is there, the market is there, and the government is very supportive of bringing proven or emerging technologies from the U.S. into the China market. They're very driven by trying to clean up the China environmental picture. And you can go to cities across China, Hangzhou, Tianjin, Beijing, and you can see evidence of clean energy all over, whether it's in the vehicles, whether it's regulations around power generation in these cities, whether it's solar being distributed around. There is a lot of evidence that China is moving very, very quickly and adopting new technologies as well. I was fortunate to visit a battery facility, a battery production facility in China, and it was amazingly advanced and turning out batteries, not the most cutting-edge batteries, but good enough, and getting them into the market for electric vehicles. So I think one of the things that we have to recognize is if we want to achieve 80 and 40, which I think is a great goal, we need to do something such that all of these technologies don't also move over offshore. And we need to develop the financing structures and institutions that are going to support them here at home. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, David. And congratulations on not only the book, but a very thoughtful examination of such broad, important issues. I wanted to touch on a couple of related themes, less about what the first wave or the second wave, and more about, I think, your perspective of innovation as a system and where different major players, including regions, fit into that. I think thinking of innovation as a system as opposed to thinking of it as a pipeline or process is a very important distinction. As a system, we talk about feedback loops, we talk about markets, we talk about the interrelationships of all those different players, as opposed to just thinking of it as a pipeline, which is, I think, too much the way we tend to think of energy technology these days, as technology push and moving technology to the next phase, as opposed to thinking of it as a market, thinking of it as a system, thinking of feedbacks and inefficiencies or efficiencies the whole way through that process. We do need to move much more in that direction. One of your recommendations, one of your areas of discourse is on the regional innovation investment boards. And specifically, I mean, that gets to a couple of major issues that are in play today. One of those is, what's the role of the federal government when we have things like Solyndra and the DOE Loan Guarantee Program, and whether a federal mechanism that has the congressional oversight on every single project, especially when you're talking large dollar amounts, can ever play a role in finance and in being able to support some of the capital requirements that this industry needs. This is a very capital-intensive industry. We know that. I think what you're talking about is an alternative model that instead says, let's have a federal mandate, which is another issue that may not be so simple to do, but this is a good time to have this discussion. But let's have a mandate for capital to come into these types of vehicles, but from the system. But then to have that capital be the allocation of that capital is decided with regional boards that are not purely government entities, but are public-private entities that also are leveraging private dollars. I think that combination of mechanisms, and where you have regional investment decisions that are looking at opportunities for the kinds of technologies and projects that have particular economic value and leverage potential in that region, which is where the stuff gets deployed and where new innovations are closest to their early adoption markets. I think it's a very interesting and valuable model to be considering. It addresses specific problems that we have with things like, what's the role of the federal government when we have clearly not only dysfunction, but a total lack of ability for us to make decisions about the role of the federal government. It also recognizes how much of our energy markets are regional, how much innovation and new projects have to be close to early adoption market opportunities. And they aren't only regional because that's the way the ISOs are organized. They're also regional because the usage patterns, population densities, the natural resources, the industry expertise for creating the supply chains to integrate these new innovations are regional as well. So all of those different pieces come together so that the regional investment decisions can bring those market systems. So it's part of the innovation system to play in thinking about that. It does, I think, thinking of innovation as a system, I was thinking, so what other systems can we think about for analogies? And certainly we tend to think about information technology or pharmaceuticals as other innovation economies. But I was also thinking, we have things like our financial system, where clearly much of it is, much of the activity happens in the private sector, but the government sets the regulation, government sets the rules, government has the oversight, and government is also a major player, whether it's with the Fed or whether it's Fannie, whether it's Freddie, whether it's the different financing mechanisms that do have direct government control over capital flows and allocation that are all about incenting private capital to move in certain ways. I think that may be closer to, although clearly financial markets are much less encumbered and much less prone to the issue of the entrenched incumbent commodity technologies. They can change much more quickly. So we need to, I think one of the big challenges in this industry, and you talk about this quite a bit, when we think about a first wave, a second wave, and then a third wave that may take 40 years to get to, yes, we're going to need at some point those kind of breakthroughs that we haven't thought about yet. But are there ways to change the system that could say those new innovations or new inventions, if and when they happen, have the potential to be interacting with markets and scale faster? We're at a point in time today when we have presidential candidates who, when they can remember the name of the department, want to get rid of it.
And is this a good thing or a bad thing? That's the one he forgot. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
I'm not sure what to make of that, but then we say, one of the points you made, actually on your 10-point list, it was, you talked about, both larger but also more diverse federal energy research roles. And that sort of says, is our current model of the DOE labs the right model? Well, and I would contend that in many ways it's not. The labs were set up around the structure of how we did weapons research during the Cold War. They were not set up in a way to say, let's do both basic and applied research in a way that has market insight, that's driven to commercialize, that works with industry, that works with markets. They aren't set up that way. Well, if this is if we have a crisis and we aren't wedded to the old system, rather than spending our time debating should ARPA-E be funded at $100 million or $300 million, which is the debate in DC today, maybe we should be having a debate about these broader structures, which are the kind of things that are in the book.
Thank you. So we have, quite a bit of time for Q&A, and I think just let's open it up. And I don't think we need mics, but if anyone wants to speak into a mic, there's one here.
We do need them for the.
Oh, we do need it for the recording. Yeah. Who would like to go first? Yes, Tim.
Hello, Tim Havel, mechanical engineer at MIT. I was somewhat interested by the fact that you were thinking about funding these innovation systems with a surcharge on electricity, whereas I would have thought, at least in principle, it would be better to fund it with either a carbon tax or a cap and trade system, at least with a portion of the proceeds that were obtained through that, because then, of course, you'd be killing two birds with one stone. Did you choose it because you just thought that would be too difficult to even discuss right now? And it was sort of, you were looking at the other side of the coin for this book, or was there another reason? Thank you.
Well, I would say, we tried that, and so far, at least, it hasn't worked. As David said, we think that the electric power sector really is on the front lines, will need to be on the front lines of the innovation challenge, and that the notion that electricity ratepayers ought to be paying for the costs of innovation is not wholly unreasonable. There are actually precedents for this kind of financing mechanism for certain kinds of innovation. The other thing I would say, and David may have different views on this and others too, but if we ever get to the point where we will have a carbon tax or of some kind, whether cap and trade or some other thing, my own view is that politically it will be more likely to happen to the degree that it is, what is the right term, tax neutral, revenue neutral, that once we start diverting, I actually think that one of the many reasons why we didn't get the cap and trade legislation through was once we started allocating uses for different components of this large revenue, I think it started to get pretty ugly. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the way to get that done. So anyway, David, do you have a...
I would love to fund it with a carbon tax. Tax the bad thing. But so the book is a funny mixture of pragmatism and idealism, and I guess I would say this is one where we erred on the side of pragmatism. And I would point out that there are such surcharges at the state level all over the country to fund efficiency and renewables. So trying to build on that precedent, and from that point of view, it's not out of the question that you could put that revenue stream in place. And we're also lined up here with a number of other mostly groups that have taken a look at it, the PCAST study and so on, that have used a similar kind of thing. We could also fund it with a gas tax, but that turns out to be slightly controversial in Perryland and elsewhere.
Other comments? Yes.
I'm a student at MIT's School of Architecture and Planning, and I wanted to ask you about the question of equity as related to imposing a surcharge on energy usage and the fact that would inevitably drive up energy costs. Did you have any provisions for how that might affect lower income consumers of energy?
Well, let me take that one. So I think our main point there is you solve poverty problems with poverty programs, not with energy programs. So if people need income support to pay for basic needs, we should provide for that in the country, but we shouldn't be doing that through cross subsidies within the energy system. That's my primary response. The other piece to point out is if there is a more time differentiated pricing, not necessarily changing every second, right? But something that reflects the real cost of generation. The evidence that I've seen, and we draw on the work of the Brattle Group primarily here, suggests that most consumers, their bill will go down. Now, that's a hypothesis that remains to be proven, but I think the fears there are somewhat overdrawn. And at least what we've looked at, it doesn't skew necessarily towards poor or rich in that regard. But it's absolutely a consideration. I just think solve the problem with the right tool.
Hi, I'm Harvey Michaels, and I've been working with Richard the last few years. After a couple of decades in having some energy efficiency-related businesses, I had the opportunity to come here, and working on the Energy Innovation Project was certainly one of the great joys of the last few years when I've had the involvement that I've had. One of the things that I'm more optimistic about, even though I was in the field, is the opportunity for energy efficiency being driven by really what's happening in communication technology. The thing that's always been hard is the market barriers, or that efficiency is really hard to see the gushers of opportunity. It's really hard historically to deal with the transactions, particularly the public values of carbon and peak demand reduction that individual consumers can make. And what we're seeing now is that we're really making some major breakthroughs. Dan was referencing Next Step Living. The CEO was in one of my classes, and working with MIT, they've got a kind of a Google Earth view of the opportunities. They have Google Street View kind of infrared scans that are finding where those efficiency barriers can be broken, and ways to move the transactions forward. And so, Richard, we've had this discussion before. You have the 3% that efficiency does and the 4% that everything else needs to do. And I wonder if we've normalized the degree of difficulty, whether or not we really ought to, whether the efficiency is kind of a layup compared with what we need to do on the renewable side, and whether we considered some scenarios to try to get more of it done by efficiency and see if we can actually get there that way.
Well, I mean, just as a very brief comment, that particular chart that we put up is certainly not intended to reflect a view that that's the appropriate division of labor between efficiency on the one hand and decarbonization on the other. I mean, I don't think it's appropriate to have a view, actually, on that. I think we just need to recognize that between them, they have to produce much more than we've managed to achieve in the past. And if it's more from efficiency and less from low-carbon energy supply, great. I mean, this is not a prescription. Don't think of that as a prescription.
So I think
Sorry.
I think the problem there is, efficiency is much cheaper than all these other things. The problems are easier. Remember, there's only like 7 ways we make energy, but there's a million ways we use it. And we can work on those as little pieces as continuous improvement. You don't have to cross the valley of death and do all these other things people talk about to solve these problems. It's a lot simpler. The problem with efficiency is it runs out. Right now, it's all low-hanging fruit, but that doesn't happen forever. There's a point at which suddenly we reach the laws of physics and other things start happening, and it gets more difficult. Right now, to make an efficient buildings are ridiculously inefficient for just absurd reasons. But after we fix those, it's going to be a lot more expensive to go after the next wave. So I think that's why wave 1, the efficiency, is so much more efficient to go after it now, financially. But eventually, it's going to get a lot tougher, and we can't depend. It's not like an entitlement. Every year, we're going to get our 3 or 5% out of efficiency. it's going to, I think it'll be a big burst where we get a lot out for a while, and then it's going to taper down.
The other thing I'd add, and I think this is a relatively recent unnoticed phenomenon, which is that some of these structural changes in the market and financing solutions are now starting to, we're seeing widespread offerings for residential solar. And this is primarily through lease and finance structures, companies like Sunrun, but the model is not exclusively Sunrun. I mean, pretty much every solar installer now is offering a leased option. So the homeowner doesn't have to spend a dime, and it's basically a finance solution. And this is really, I think, going to cause a sea change in adoption of residential solar over the coming years. We're starting to see a significant pickup. The one thing that's aided in that is that we've had absolutely massive decline in solar panel costs, largely driven by China. But while the manufacturers are complaining about dumping, the installers are saying this is the best thing for the industry. So there's not uniformity of viewpoints around whether the whole panel production and dumping issue is good or bad. But I do think side by side with efficiency, we will see a lot more solar being installed at a distributed level.
Laura, did you have a...
Thank you. Laura Diaz-Anadon from the Harvard Kennedy School, and my question is on this concept of the innovation. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Of the innovation system, and you have a really great description, and you talk about all kinds of different things that should be done. And the question that comes to mind that you probably mentioned in the book is the question of coordination. How are all of these things that are necessary going to happen? And I was wondering if you could talk about whether the quadrennial energy review or what sort of things may allow for all of these things to happen simultaneously, or in these phases in some way.
I'll let you take that one.
I don't know. I mean, I think that there is a sort of a theme in the book that we actually need to move away. One of the most common statements that we hear in this field, we've all heard it many, many times. We don't have a national energy policy. We don't have coordination, and it's true, we don't. I think what we try to do in this book is to suggest that actually there are a number of areas where we shouldn't even try, and that where necessary we should be centralizing, but where possible we should be decentralizing. And I think in a number of these areas, particularly in some of these financing areas, the idea that we can solve these problems, I think maybe Dan mentioned this, the idea that we can solve these problems through federal financing mechanisms, coordinated federal financing mechanisms, I think it's just too hard, and that we should be looking for ways to decentralize and push authority and responsibility down or out to, in that particular case, regional entities. So there is clearly a gap at the federal level, and I think one of the areas where it might well be that the quadrennial energy review can really help us is in keeping track of how we're doing. There are actually some pretty simple measures that could be used to measure the progress towards a set of goals. And to have that function played at the federal level would not be too demanding. It wouldn't require, the same kind of things that a financing entity would have to fulfill. I think there are things like that that we need to be doing more of at the federal level. But I don't think that we should expect much more than, it would be nice to expect more, but I don't think in the coming years we can expect too much from the federal government in terms of the financial inputs into this problem, but maybe in terms of setting goals and monitoring performance towards those goals.
I just wanted to reiterate something that Peter brought out, which I didn't raise very much in my presentation, which is the importance of user pull as a mechanism here for driving innovation. And again, that's a statement about, a little bit about less coordination. So rather than funding factories, may be necessary in some cases because of this huge capital burden, but where possible, I think you want to try to get the users to be making these decisions and discovering which innovations really work, and that's one of the big themes of the argument that we lay out. So again, I think that speaks to the point about, you know, the Manhattan Project is the wrong model for sure.
Yeah, there's a bit of an analogy in, I think, the race to the top experiments that have been tried in the education sector, where rather than saying we're going to set a standard nationally and we're going to fund it nationally and we're going to have quadrennial planning and like, instead they said we're going to create some goals and some incentives and structures, but then we're going to make these funds available to be implemented regionally, and to look at, you know, what exists on the ground in those regions and to involve the users and affect markets. You know, there may be some mechanisms that are similar to that, to what you're describing in the regional engagement.
My name is Hubert Murray. I'm an architect with Partners Healthcare, and we're running a sustainability program there. And we instituted a strategic energy master plan. There are about 12 hospitals. Our electricity bill is about $100 million a year. It's huge. And we figured we better do something about it just to contain healthcare costs for starters. And we are well on our way for our phase one, which is mainly energy conservation measures. And we have figured out we can achieve a 25% reduction in consumption in 5 years and get our payback within that period, and it's looking terrific. Our phase two is looking towards cogeneration, sort of fairly standard technology, cogeneration at each of the hospital sites where we can fit it, and that's most of them. And that brings us well within, I mean, sort of comfortably within the state legislation, the state requirements, which is, you know, the overall 80% reduction by 2050, and we'll be well within by 2025, doing well. However, but that is assuming that it was sort of flat growth over the last 20 years. Actually, we have been increasing our plug loads by 1.5% per annum. And whereas the state baseline is in 1990, our baseline was in 2008. So already we're starting at a disadvantage. So when you look at the dynamic model, we are barely grazing what the state is requiring of us. And by the end of phase two, we will have shot our bolt. That's it. With all the technology at our disposal, and certainly financially at our disposal, we're done. And beyond 2025, we have got nothing more to work with in order to achieve that 80% reduction by 2050. We're nowhere. So we are trying to look at this now to see where we can possibly invest, or where we can encourage others to come and invest with us, to look at alternative technologies which will get us to that 2050 status, which we're really searching for.
Neil, is that something you...
Well, obviously, as providers of systems for buildings and things that are plug loads, we're not asleep. I mean, we definitely continue to work on all these problems. Will you know now what you're going to be able to use 10 years from now? No, we can't necessarily tell you that. But I can tell you that the more it's clear to companies, to large companies like ours, that there's a predictable requirement in terms of whether it's the regulations or the goals that are driving people, the more that's predictable, the more confidence I have we're going to deliver the answers you need. If you just throw out financial incentives, that's the last thing companies like us want to see. They come and go in 2 seconds. The tax incentives, they're here one day, gone the next. Look at Spain with the solar business in Spain. We don't like that. We really are much more comfortable. Give us a predictable target that everybody needs to hit. If everybody like you needs to take another 10% out of their buildings out to the next 10 years, there's a lot of companies who are ready and able to give you the answers you need. We're just not, we can't tell you what they are right now.
Time for one more question. Eric.
Well, I was kind of suggesting in your discussion of the regulations, you're referring mostly to setting of standards. I think that's important. You differentiate between setting standards and regulations, because I think going forward in the political environment that has a very negative connotation to everyone in business. But no one's really against setting high standards, and I would agree based on what I've been involved in. If the standards set out there, companies scramble to do it, and they make whole new products and find new businesses to do that. So differentiating between setting high standards for the energy sector versus talking about regulating it, I think eases the conversation, in some ways.
Well, there's a choice of words, and I totally agree with you. Regulation, the word is done. It's cooked. We can't use it anymore, right? So I shouldn't even be saying that word in my conversation. But the fact is that the DOE is out there grinding out regulations about energy efficiency for plug loads and things as we speak. The only scary part I see is there was nobody doing it 10 years ago, and now I go talk to these people. They all look like high school kids doing this stuff. So it's a little scary. But, anyway.
I did want to...
Just the other comment I wanted to have was, since the last 3 years since we're working on this project, there's been some major shifts in terms of what's going on. There's been, of course, the economy, which has slowed down a lot of innovation in this area, energy sector, the possibilities. But hasn't there been a lot of innovation on the generation of and the production of fossil fuels? And so, which is now really competing against all these other things we're trying to do in terms of, reducing energy use. So it's like we have an innovation race, but boy, they're doing very well on the other side of it in terms of oil and gas production. And so the target is not, it's a moving target. And the latest things, I see the guys down the street here, Mr. Jurgen, are saying, oh, but there's going to be plenty of oil. Don't worry about that. It may be a price, but there's going to be plenty of it. Natural gas, it's like the United States is now going from importing to exporting it. So, aren't we kind of hurtling down a path here in the U.S. that says, yeah, we may get to so-called energy independence, but it's going to have nothing to do with what the federal government had in mind. It's going to be more about what, the traditional energy sector is doing to increase the supply. So,
So maybe one last comment about that, because clearly these developments not only will contribute to energy security, but are expected, remains to be seen, but are expected to help keep electricity bills low or lower than they would otherwise be. And even from the carbon point of view, at least in the near term, these gas discoveries may well be a very positive factor to the extent that they can be used to back out inefficient coal-fired electricity generation. So I think there are multiple wins associated with these developments. Of course, in the longer run, the concern is that if prices remain low, and that's a very big if, and I think, some of us are old enough to remember previous periods when there's been great optimism about low prices of fossil fuels, and expectations change. But if prices remain low, then the longer-term concern is, of course, that it will inhibit investment in low-carbon energy supplies, whether renewables or nuclear or whatever. The short-run gains are really quite significant. They have come not from federal programs, but from innovators in the private sector, actually not initially, as you probably are at least as familiar as me, not from large oil and gas companies, but actually from independents and smaller players. I think the question, though, that we have to keep our eye on is, at what point will the short-term benefits transition into longer-term problems and costs associated with this from the carbon point of view? And I don't think we can predict that at this point. But it would certainly be churlish to speak ill of these developments, setting aside issues of short-term environmental impacts, which I don't think we should underestimate either. Okay, so we're at 5:30. Oh, Burl, yeah, last question.
Okay, thank you. I applaud you for taking a long-term view and a system view of the issues of innovation. But as one famous person once said, in the long run, we're all dead. So my question is about the short term, let's say the next 2 to 4 years, given where we are politically and where we are in the economy. What are the arguments that we can make to, whether it's federal leadership or regional leadership or utilities or whoever, that we need to be investing now, and it will, I think I heard you say that over the long term, you didn't see a big growth in jobs or in economic vitality. And if that's the case, then what are we left with to make the case in the short term?
Well, the question of jobs, I mean, I actually think that, and this is a very long discussion, and I think that we are in danger, and maybe have been in danger, of falling into a trap on the jobs front with respect to the energy innovation area. I think that there's obviously going to be job creation associated with these new technologies. But equally, there will be jobs destroyed by in the traditional industries, in the incumbent areas. And there's no basis on which to assume that the overall creation of jobs will be particularly large. And I think we're beginning to see some of the backlash associated, so I think we have to be very careful in making an argument about employment, even though at the regional and local levels, one might indeed see very positive, and we do see very positive outcomes. I think the case has to be made on the things that we have been talking about for a long time, which are, climate and security.
Let me just pick up on that a little bit. I think the immediate argument that has some purchase is on the security side. So the Defense Department, bless its heart, is starting to get into this game. The supposed tooth-to-tail ratio in the field is like 1,000 gallons of gas to get one gallon of gas to the front line. So they are losing people, in these convoys of gas going across Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, hopefully our troops are coming home from those places, but nonetheless, that's, given DOD, that inertia once started may last a little while, and there's some interesting people, in those positions now within the Defense Department. So I think in the short term, that's one immediate opportunity, and also given the budget situation, the kind of numbers we're talking about are easier to hide in the defense budget than even in an energy budget. So that's, that would be at the national level, my suggestion there. But obviously, that's a dangerous road to go down, right? You don't want to turn everything into a military security problem, but there's an obvious argument there. There are some good payoffs from investments to be had, and there's already some momentum.
Peter?
But, a comment on the jobs front, because I think we do have to be careful how we talk about it. I think there's been, over the last couple of years, I think there's been some, I think slippery slope over-promising of the promise of green jobs, which has now, been derided in many quarters. However, this sector has been adding jobs, and I think there's actually the flip side, Richard, of what you said. There will be jobs lost over the coming years because there will be new energy innovations. The question is whether those energy innovation jobs happen here or outside the U.S. So I think it's capturing our share or more than our fair share if we're really innovating. The deployment side of it does create a lot of regional jobs, both on the energy efficiency side and frankly I think on the renewable side and on the, I think the creation of a smart grid is those are regional jobs. By the way, comment you made, I have 2 different companies bringing fiber to my house on the telecommunications side. So, we haven't had that discussion about, do we have competition on that side of it in terms of utilities, but that's another discussion.
Okay, so we're over time, but we can continue this conversation over cocktails next door. Thank you.